Welcome to Situational Awareness Tactics Podcast. This podcast provides the crucial art of understanding current elements in an environment to increase your safety and survival. Here's your host, forensic psychologist and consultant, Dr. Carlos.
Welcome, everyone. Today we have a very unique guest. This is going to be really fun. His name is Dr. Chase Cunningham. He holds a PhD and an MS in computer science from Colorado Technical University and a BS from American Military University focused on counterterrorism operations in cyberspace. So why did I say he's a unique guest? Because we haven't delved too much into this area yet on situational awareness, which is cyber warfare. Truth, Tactics, and Strategies is his book. It's called Cyber Warfare, Truth, Tactics, Strategies, Strategic Concepts, and Truths to help you and your organization survive on the battleground of cyber warfare. I can't wait to learn more about this. As I tell you, I've been delving into this a little bit more, and how relevant it is for your situational awareness. Security is quite significant. So let's not waste any more time. Welcome to the show, Dr. Chase Cunningham. Welcome, sir.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you for being here. And again, great book. And I want to make sure if I'm right here, but some of the things in your book also help civilians. Am I correct?
Yeah, I tried to write the book for just, general knowledge purposes. I mean, I think that it's kind of vectored towards computer science-y people, but I've had a lot of folks that are way removed from computer science world tell me that they got a lot out of it. So I think it's pretty broadly applicable.
That's great. Now, in your book, some of the things you do is you define and determine a cyber defense strategy based on your own examples. Understand how future technologies will impact cyber warfare. And folks, we are going to talk a little bit about Raspberry Pi. If you haven't heard of it, you'll find out what it is. And if you have, you might wonder more about it. We're going to be talking about that today, as well as pirate boxes and who knows what else. There's another thing I want to talk to him about too, which is I think it's called the Author Watch. So we'll see if we get any insight on that. Dr. Cunningham, before we go on, what's the website everybody can find you at?
Well, you can find me usually on LinkedIn, and Twitter is probably one of the easiest ways. Or I do have a comic book I publish for families and kids called the Cynja, C-Y-N-J-A, and you can find me there as well.
Excellent. So make sure, folks, you follow him on Twitter at Cynchase, that's C-Y-N-J-A, Cynja Chase C. So C-Y-N-J-A-C-H-A-S-E-C, Chase Cunningham. He's on Twitter. So, Dr. Cunningham, let's see. First things first. A brief history of cyber threats is what you start your book on. Can you give us an example of that?
Yeah, well, part of why I wrote this book was I was honestly kind of fed up with all the just junk in the media around, hackers and cyber and whatever else, and they hadn't really looked at it very pragmatically. So what I did was I crawled through essentially the history of warfare and mapped it into cyberspace. And look, what we're doing in cyberspace is not really any different than what's gone on in warfare. We just have a more adaptable, more dynamic, faster medium to engage. And, one of the first instances I put in there was this scenario called the Battle of the Beams back in World War II. And that was a great example of using electronic communications to jam up bombers, and actually the British used it to confuse the Germans. So I mean, this is not necessarily something that's so new, and it's just a different way of using technology to do the same thing.
That's a great point, because it's been around for a while, and I think China and Russia have been involved in this for quite a while. So
yeah, it's been a national issue for longer than most people realize.
And they have some. Actually, it's funny because I know when I've read some cyber terrorism textbooks. I'm kind of a geek that way. I like to read textbooks, but I was stunned on how many cyber attacks, significant ones, costing hundreds of millions of dollars, have already happened in the past 15 years that you barely saw any coverage on in the news. But there's been a lot.
Yeah. I think the last number I saw on just an estimated total for impact for the decade was over $1 trillion in losses. I mean, it's a lot of dough.
And let's look at that, if you don't mind. Let's look at that a little bit. What costs that money? What is it that's costing the government? Is it the protection aspect? Is it the investigation aspect, or all the above?
Well, it's kind of all of the above, but usually where they have the most cost is actually when they're trying to continually secure stuff without the right strategic approach. And the reason I say that is, if you can imagine somebody trying to build a bridge as cars are driving over it. It's really hard to do. The smart thing is basically say, like, look, you can keep using this bridge, but I'm going to build a new perfect one over here, and when I'm ready, I'll open it up and allow you to drive over it. We don't want to build the airplane as we're falling off the cliff.
Yeah, no, probably not. One of the things I was intrigued by your book, too, is you talk about the influence attacks that are happening on social media platforms. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we've actually seen a couple of instances of that already occur during this whole sort of political upheaval we've got going on right now. There was an instance a few weeks ago where there was a very popular Black Lives Matter influencer that had a weak password on their Twitter account. A white supremacist organization popped that password and logged in and basically used that Black Lives Matter account to spread misinformation about a rally that was coming up. And luckily, the police were able to intercept and kind of help this thing, not be a major problem. But they were within minutes of having a full-on confrontation between a known white supremacist organization and a group of Black Lives Matter protesters because this type of influence operation had occurred. And that's exactly what I said would happen in the book, and here we are.
That was in your emerging tactics chapter, I think.
Yeah, and that was kind of to get the point across to folks of like, look, influence is a big deal nowadays. You have folks with millions, in some cases hundreds of millions of followers, and if they say the wrong thing, even if it's not actually them saying it, it could be a big time problem.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in 2016, didn't the Russians set up a Black Lives Matter account that had like 500,000 followers, and they were organizing all sorts of things?
Oh, yeah, and there's been a couple of other instances of different nation states that have set up Twitter and LinkedIn accounts and Facebook profiles and whatnot that have had, I think the largest one I've seen had over 1 million followers.
Holy cow. 1 million followers. Yeah, it's one of the things I always tweet when I'm on Twitter is Twitter is not reality, and you have to be careful. But unfortunately, it can translate into reality if you're not careful.
Well, and that's one of the things I wrote about in my book was like one of the simplest things people can do to combat this is set up multi-factor authentication. Because even if you crack into my Twitter account, if I have MFA on it, it will tell me, hey, is this you? And then I can say no, and they don't post stuff on my Twitter account.
Oh, that's a great point. Actually, that's a good segue into this. Can you give people, actually, are there any, aside from social media, is there any other threats that you've seen to people? I've heard stories of people telling me, hey, don't go on public Wi-Fi at airports. People can jump onto that. Or Starbucks, people can change, they can put fake Wi-Fi connection, Wi-Fi, I can't think of the term now.
Yep. I think you're better off using your LTE hotspot on your phone than using Wi-Fi anywhere. It's kind of like, you wouldn't go to the hotel and just walk around randomly, touching surfaces and then putting your fingers in your mouth. Sooner or later, you're going to get sick. It's the same thing with Wi-Fi. You don't trust it, and your LTE is sort of a network that's in your hand. So I always tell people to use that. The other sort of threat that I think needs to be made more aware is the issue we have with drones. And drones are what actually scares me in a kinetic manner.
How so?
Well, I wrote about it in my book where there are open source pieces of software that will allow you to take over a drone in flight. And if you think about what a drone actually is, I mean, it's a chunk of plastic and metal that flies at 60 or 70 miles an hour. If you've got enough of those and you aim them at a target, I mean, that's a projectile. And it can happen, and there are no controls out there right now to stop that.
There's nothing to stop that?
No, I mean, there's some, government projects where they're talking about jamming and whatnot, but the issue is if you engage that, you want actually DOSing or DDoSing the electromagnetic spectrum. So it's one of those deals where there's really no technical control for it as it stands today. And that, for me personally, I'm being ex-military and my time dealing with terrorists, like that's the scenario that keeps me awake.
I forgot to mention, thank you for your service, sir. Let me ask you this then. So the drones are big issues. I know they're flying. The cartels are using them. I've heard gang members use them to track police when they're coming. So it's quite interesting how often they get used, and that's scary. Not just so they can be hijacked so easily.
Yeah, well, I put a bit in my book on one of the chapters on drones. I showed some imagery from ICE using them to drop grenades. And I mean, if they can do it in Syria, why can't they do it in downtown LA?
Yeah, that's right. You're absolutely right, unfortunately. You also, it's actually funny because I know you made a comment on your Twitter. Folks, again, it's Synjay, C-Y-N-J-A, Chase, C. You made a comment about DNS you all. In response to why 83% of large companies are vulnerable to this basic domain article brought up here, domain hack. It says recent study shows that companies cannot defend against potentially catastrophic domain name hijacks, and then you say DNS you're all. What did you mean by that?
Well, so there's a lot of issues around organizations have had impersonation problems with their domains, and if you think about like a company where their domain name is like Allianz or something, and if you buy the domain but you switch the ALL to a capital I, that looks just like Allianz and no one would think about it, and then you copy their webpage code and you put that out publicly, and I can redirect people to look at my fake Allianz website and put whatever I want on it, infect their machines, etc., and the person that's actually responsible is the company themselves. So this is a big issue, especially for large companies, because they might have thousands of domains that could potentially be compromised in that manner.
And you said they're the ones liable for it.
Yeah, and that's the problem, is if it's me personally as a bad guy and I do it, I'll set the domain up for a day, I'll get all the targets that I want and cause all the hate and discontent, and then I just shut it off and go away, and you're the one left holding the bag, because they're going to come back asking Allianz or whoever that might be that, you know, why did you hack my site, or why did you steal my credit card, or whatever.
Oh, man. This is a scary conversation, Dr. Cunningham. Scary conversation.
Oh, these things that there's a reality to this space, and I remind people too that while you talk to folks about the reality of it, it doesn't necessarily need to be scary, but you need to be real about it and aware of it.
Let me ask you this. I've heard mixed comments about this. How safe are our banks in regards to our bank accounts, for instance? If we look at the individual, how safe are they?
Well, so the only couple of things that I think have probably done a really good job of staying up with the threat is the U.S. government and the banking system. And the reason I say that is because they've been getting punched in the head for longer than anybody else. So they've had trade. And if you kind of think about it, you know, you've seen where your bank account over the last couple of years has had things like biometrics and multi-factor auth and all kinds of things applied to it. So the banking system, for just the general, you know, easy hacks, has actually done a really good job.
Every time I see my bank account, I think somebody's hacked into it, but maybe I'm just
luckily,
looking into
like
it.
All they're going to do, all they can do with me is get debt. So come on, bring it.
I think they put me into debt. Doctor, okay, so now we looked at that. What are some of the actually, before we get to what are some of the things people can do to defend themselves, there's a couple more things. I wanted to talk about the recent DDoS attack that we just had. That was big news and then just disappeared like usual. And then we'll go into that kind of the new phenomenon of Raspberry Pi, Firebox, all that stuff. But first, let's go into that DDoS attack. What was that all about?
Yeah, so actually Amazon was kind of given the credit for mitigating that attack, and it is something that seems to happen about once every 3 years, where there will be a large sort of denial of service attack launched across the internet, and it's not really well aimed. It's just a general trying to take down any targets they can find. And luckily, because of the scale of AWS and the way that people have built their back-end infrastructure, it was a lot less bad than it could have been. I think that's why it showed up in the news, because some sites were down. There was some impact, but it wasn't nearly as bad as it would have been if this was, say, 5 years ago.
So it wasn't the end of the world like a lot of sites were proposing?
No, more of a nuisance. And, I mean, you know, for any site that generates revenue off of their uptime, it did cause them some impact. But in the grand scheme of Cataclysm, it was a 4 on a scale of 1 to 10. All
right, so let's go to the more recent phenomenon. Again, folks, we're talking to Dr. Chase Cunningham. You can find his book on Amazon, Cyber Warfare, Truth, Tactics, and Strategies. It's a great book. Let me ask you this. So we're going to this site I'm starting to see a lot of, and I don't know if it's just for the fun of it, if it's more because people can actually use it, but this Raspberry Pi, and no, it's not food, folks, and the Pirate Box, what are these things?
Yeah, so this is something that's been interesting because it used to be you had to be a computer scientist to kind of build these microcomputers, and basically what a Raspberry Pi or a Pirate Box is a mini computer with full operating system that all you need is a monitor, and you can turn it on and plug it in, and you can do anything you've ever wanted with it. And it is the commoditization of sort of exploitation software. And it use them for very positive effects. There's people using them for research and for healthcare and whatnot, but just like anything, the tool is based on the intent of the user. And there's lots of folks that are using these for password stealing and ATM hacking and wireless exploitation. So yeah, it's a very ubiquitous, very commoditized microcomputer.
Well, that's the thing that was amazing to me because I'm glad you pointed that out because that's what I've been seeing a lot. Now I've seen two groups. There's a black hat, white hat, in regards to different types of hackers, I guess, and there's some kind of hacktivist movement going on. What is that?
Yeah, there's actually a few instances of pirate boxes showing up during some of the protests recently where they were using them to jam wireless signal, and they were actually being aimed at boosting the signal for protesters and knocking down the wireless signal for businesses and whatnot that were in the protest area. So, I mean, these are little systems that can be used for a variety of purposes, and they're starting to show up more often. And the interesting thing is, 10 years ago, you would have had to be deeply technical to do this. Right now, you can go on YouTube and Google set up Pirate Box, and it'll tell you how to do it.
Yeah, that's amazing how simple it seems like. I'm not sure if you are familiar with the D-Author. I think they call it maybe I'm saying the name wrong, but the D-Author wristwatch looks like it's not really a watch. I'm not sure what that thing is.
Well, so it's a guy basically has miniaturized another form of Arduino board, which is another microcomputer, and he's kind of calibrated it to where you can do different sort of hacky things with it. Now, it's not very powerful as far as its ability to reach very, very long distances, but it is just a little sort of wireless controller type microcomputer that could be used for potentially nefarious purposes. I think it's more of a interesting, cool, look what I can do thing than it is a sort of weaponized commodity.
I know, but I'm talking to some guys on the Intel side that they use Raspberry Pi sometimes to communicate to each other, so nobody else can capture the communication. Is that about right?
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing about a lot of these micro instances now is that you can modify much with them that as long as somebody else is using the same form that you are, you can have a protected network and communicate securely. And because they're one-off, if I build mine, it's different from how you build yours. It's really hard to get a line on the general build processes.
Interesting. All right, we're going to switch into one more question before we get into how do we protect ourselves mode. But the one last question, I was curious about Anonymous. We have a lot of people that come out and they say, we want Anonymous, almost like a savior kind of mentality. We want it to come out and save us or help us in times of trouble, if they want to leak information, whatnot. What do you know about Anonymous? Is it a real group? Is it not really organized at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think Anonymous is still a powerful player in the space, and honestly, I think in some instances they've done some really helpful things. I also think every once in a while there's been some instances where some negative effects have happened with that organization, but they're there, they are organized, they do conduct operations, and they do have some very talented individuals that are, in their cadre. So Anonymous is an entity that I would be aware of for sure.
Interesting. All right. I guess our second to last part is what would you recommend? What are some of the tips that you would recommend for civilians out there, besides reading your book, of course? But what are some of the tips that you would recommend to protect themselves in this cyber world?
Well, I mean, you really have to think about it just the same way that you think about your general safety. If you were to go walking through a city and you saw a dark alley, you probably wouldn't go walking down it at night and expect to walk out the other side. Cyberspace is the same thing. You're in a really dangerous environment. If you're not thinking about what's going on and not aware of your surroundings, that's when bad stuff happens. So folks need to pay attention. They need to be cognizant. Luckily, there's a lot of capabilities that exist to help protect you, but it's on the user to understand the intricacies of the space and know how to protect themselves. If this was 2015, I would have said this is a really difficult problem to solve, but where we are with technology now, it's getting easier all the time.
Yeah, that's the amazing thing. Would you advise people, so you said multi-authentication factors would be important for social media accounts. I'm assuming for other things as well, or just that?
Yeah, I would say if you have an account or you have anything that can allow you to set up some sort of out-of-band authentication, do it now, because that, just to give you an idea of how effective that is. Do you remember a few years ago when you used to go to the gas station and you just zipped your credit card left, and then they put that thing in where you have to put in your PIN or your zip code?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the gas companies did that to eliminate fraud, and when they put that in place, they saw a 97% reduction in fraud in 7 days. So that one out-of-band factor for authentication reduced fraud by 97% nationally.
Just by putting your zip code or your phone?
Just by your zip code or your PIN in on a credit card. It's the same thing on your thing else. So I tell people all the time, if you want to be more secure, do MFA everywhere you can.
Wow, that's amazing, 97%. Here's one more question. I think this is more my personal thing. Where do you think the future lies for social media? I'm seeing it now. We know the Trump administration, it looks like trying to crack down on it. We know some senators are trying to crack down on it. Everything you've mentioned with all these hacked accounts, these fake accounts, getting information on people. We've seen things like doxing, obviously foreign intervention from China and Russia in our politics and whatnot. Do you think social media will change in the next 5 to 10 years?
I don't think it's going to change in any meaningful fashion for the next 5 to 10 years. I personally think social media is a place that is best used to, interact with your family that's remote. But other than that, I don't think anyone ever should be basing their decisions or getting their information specifically off of one form of social media. What I tell people is, I call it the law of three. Make sure that you have 3 different sources from 3 different organizations that have 3 different views, and then make a decision. Don't just run off with one thing because somebody said it.
Great advice. Well, again, folks, that's Dr. Chase Cunningham. His book, Cyber Warfare, you can find it on Amazon.com. I highly recommend it. You can also find him as well on Twitter, so you definitely want to follow him on Twitter. He's Cynja, C-Y-N-J-A, Chase, C. Those are his handle over there at Twitter. Definitely follow him on Twitter to keep up to speed. Thank you so much, Dr. Cunningham, for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me. This was fun.
It was a lot of fun. I learned so much. I truly appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Make sure, if you want to support our podcast, to share and subscribe. Thanks, everyone, for listening.